The crystal chandelier above us probably cost more than my first apartment. It cast a glittering, unforgiving light on the assembled crowd, each sequin and diamond vying for attention. My name is Victoria, and for the past 7 years, this has been my life, a supporting role in the Spencer Family Opera. Tonight was their annual foundation gala, a monument to their self proclaimed generosity, and I was, as usual, the slightly embarrassing, out of place prop. Still playing with your little charity cases, Victoria, dear? Edith's voice, sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the polite murmur. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It rarely did when she looked at me. She patted my arm with perfectly manicured fingers, the diamonds on her rings winking. My son needs a partner who builds empires, not soup kitchens. I kept my own smile firmly in place, the one I'd perfected over years of her casual cruelties. The Global Harmony Foundation is doing quite well, Edith. We're making a real difference. Oh, I'm sure you are, dear, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She turned to Mrs. Albright, whose husband owned a shipping conglomerate. It's so important for young women to have hobbies. Mrs. Albright offered a tight, sympathetic smile in my direction before Edith steered her away, already launching into a monologue about Benjamin's latest supposed triumph. My husband, the man who, at that very moment, was across the room schmoozing with some potential investor, blissfully unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of the daggers his mother so expertly threw. He'd heard variations of that soup kitchen line 100 times. He'd never once defended me. Not really. A quiet, "Now, mother," muttered long after the damage was done, didn't count. The air in the ballroom was thick with more than just expensive perfume and the scent of lobster bisque. Whispers slithered through the crowd, little currents of excitement and speculation. Did you hear? Spencer Consolidated was on the brink. A complete unknown. Some angel investor. Millions, darling, an absolute fortune out of nowhere. I took a slow sip of my champagne, the bubbles doing little to lift the familiar weight in my chest. Spencer Consolidated, Benjamin's legacy, his birthright, had indeed been teetering on the edge of a very public, very messy collapse, and it had, just hours ago, been saved by an anonymous, multi-million-dollar bailout. Edith, of course, was already spinning it as a testament to Benjamin's brilliance, his ability to attract investment even in these trying times. She had no idea. None of them did. I watched her across the room, holding court, her laughter loud and confident. She was practically glowing with smug relief. Benjamin caught my eye and gave a small, almost apologetic grimace before turning back to his conversation. He probably thought I was upset about another one of Edith's barbs. He had no concept of the scale of things. For years, I'd swallowed her disdain, his passivity. I'd poured my heart, my intellect, and every spare moment into building something meaningful, something that wasn't about inherited wealth or social climbing. The Global Harmony Foundation, my little charity cases. They'd dismissed it, ridiculed it, treated it as a quaint distraction for the wife who clearly wasn't ambitious enough for their gilded world. The irony was so rich, so potent, it was almost suffocating. A server offered me another canapé. I declined. My appetite was for something entirely different tonight. Edith's voice carried again, louder this time, addressing a small circle of her cronies. It just goes to show true power, real influence, it's in our blood. Benjamin has it. He always pulls through. I saw her glance my way, a flicker of triumph in her eyes as if to punctuate her earlier point about empire builders. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. It wasn't the polite, practiced one. This was different. This was the smile of a predator who had patiently waited, who had watched her prey grow fat and complacent. She has no idea, I thought, the champagne flute cool against my palm. But she will. Oh, she absolutely will. Tonight. The orchestra swelled, signaling the start of the formal program. People began to drift toward their tables. Benjamin finally detached himself from his group and made his way over to me, his expression a mixture of relief and forced bonhomie. There you are, he said, taking my arm. Mother being. Mother? As always, I replied, my voice even. Don't let her get to you, he said, his standard useless advice. Tonight's a big night. We're saved, Vic. Can you believe it? Some anonymous hero. He squeezed my arm. We can finally breathe. I looked at him, really looked at him. The relief was genuine, but so was the complete lack of curiosity about where this miracle had come from beyond the abstract idea of a benevolent stranger. He was already moving on, thinking about the future, his future built on a foundation he didn't understand. It is rather incredible, I agreed, letting him lead me towards our table, front and center, the Spencer family table. The stage was set, quite literally, and the star of tonight's show wasn't going to be who they expected. Quinn, my father in law, nodded curtly as we sat, his face a mask of stoic relief. He was a man of fewer words than Edith, but his disapproval of my unconventional pursuits had always been just as palpable. Tonight, however, even he seemed too preoccupied with the company's salvation to spare me more than a passing glance. The entire family was radiating a desperate, almost manic joy. They thought they'd dodged a bullet. They had no idea they'd walked right into my carefully laid trap. The Global Harmony Foundation hadn't started as a weapon. It began 5 years ago, born from a frustration so deep it felt like a physical ache. I just returned from a trip, one of those find yourself things I'd insisted on before fully succumbing to the Spencer vortex. I'd seen things real poverty, real suffering, but also incredible resilience. I came back fired up, full of ideas. I remember trying to explain it to Benjamin over dinner at one of his parents' ridiculously oversized homes. It wouldn't just be about handouts, I'd said, my voice earnest. It would be about sustainable solutions, empowering communities from the ground up. We could focus on clean water initiatives, maybe develop small scale renewable energy tech for remote villages. He'd swirled his wine, a 1982 Bordeaux that probably cost more than the initial seed money I was dreaming of. That's ambitious, Vic. He didn't look at me. He was looking at his father, Quinn, who was pontificating about a new acquisition. Edith, however, had honed in immediately. Darling, that's what the UN is for, isn't it? Or those dreadful telethons. You should focus on chairing the museum benefit. Much more suitable. She'd smiled, that tight, dismissive curve of her lips. Leave the heavy lifting to the professionals. Benjamin had finally chimed in, a placating hand on my arm. She means well, Vic. It's just, it's a bit out there, isn't it? My focus needs to be on Spencer Consolidated. That's our future. This, this is a nice hobby for you. A hobby. That's what they'd all called it. My little project. Even as GHF grew, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum, their attitude never changed. They never asked, never showed genuine interest. It was easier for them to keep me in that box, the well meaning, slightly naive wife with her charitable dabblings. What they didn't know, what I'd meticulously kept hidden with the help of Malia, my fiercely loyal CFO, and my oldest friend, was that GHF wasn't just about handing out grants. My small scale renewable energy tech idea, it had blossomed. We'd accidentally, through sheer grit and some brilliant young engineers I'd headhunted, developed a revolutionary, low cost solar panel material and a water purification system so efficient it was almost miraculous. We patented them, we licensed them quietly, globally. The revenue was staggering, and every penny, every single dime was funneled back into GHF, growing its endowment, expanding its reach, and more recently, building a discreet investment arm. An investment arm that was now, ironically, the anonymous savior of Spencer Consolidated. Back at the gala, the soup course had arrived. Benjamin was picking at his lobster bisque, his earlier euphoria tinged with a nervous energy I recognized. He kept glancing towards the podium, then around the room, his jaw tight. He was relieved, yes, but the unknown benefactor, the sheer scale of the bailout, it clearly unsettled him. He liked to be in control, or at least to project the illusion of it. This? This was out of his hands. He caught me watching him. You okay? He mouthed. I nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. The kind, supportive wife gives. He still had no clue. The man I'd married, the man I'd once believed would be my partner in all things, was so blinded by his family's expectations and his own ambition that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Or rather, who? My phone vibrated discreetly in my clutch. I slipped it out under the cover of the tablecloth. A secure message from Malia. Phase 1 complete. The anonymous funds are untraceably in their account. Your timing for Phase 2? My fingers flew across the screen, my heart hammering a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. This was it. Years of planning, of enduring, of building in silence. It all came down to tonight. I typed back a single word: showtime. The main course arrived, a filet mignon that looked as expensive as it probably was. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite still non existent. The real feast was yet to come. "Excuse me for a moment," I murmured to Benjamin, dabbing my lips with a napkin. He barely registered, already deep in conversation with a portly man whose tie was slightly askew, a banker, I presumed, now probably much friendlier than he'd been a week ago. I rose and began a slow circuit of the room, a polite smile fixed on my face. The air was electric. "No one seems to know a thing, completely out of the blue," a woman with an elaborate feather fascinator exclaimed to her companion. "My sources say the terms were surprisingly ethical," a man with a sharp suit whispered, "almost as if the donor has a conscience. Imagine that." I paused near a group that included Jordan Whitney, a woman whose social standing was built on a foundation of meticulously curated gossip. As if on cue, Edith materialized beside me, her hand landing on my arm with a proprietary grip. "Victoria, darling, Jordan was just asking about your endeavors." Edith's smile was saccharine sweet, her eyes glinting. "I was explaining that while Benjamin is busy saving empires, well, you're saving souls, aren't you? In your own little way." She turned to Jordan, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for half the table to hear. "It's such a comfort to know that not everyone in the family needs to contribute to the real work, the heavy lifting of maintaining a legacy like Spencer Consolidated. Some can afford to pursue passions." Jordan's eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked between me and Edith. "How admirable," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Indeed," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. "Passion can be a powerful engine, Edith. Sometimes it builds things far more substantial than one might imagine." I gave Jordan a polite nod. "It's fascinating, isn't it, this anonymous donation? Such a significant gesture. One wonders about the benefactor's motivations. Perhaps there's someone who values quiet impact over public acclaim." Jordan leaned in, her interest piqued. "That's what everyone is saying, that it's not one of the usual suspects. Someone different. Perhaps someone who believes that true strength lies in ethical foundations." I mused, as if the thought had just occurred to me. I let the question hang in the air before excusing myself to mingle. I continued my rounds, dropping similar innocent observations. To Mr. Albright, the shipping magnate, "Such a bold move, this bailout. Almost makes you think the donor might have a specific vision for the company's future, doesn't it?" To a well known philanthropist, Mrs. Davies, "It's inspiring, a reminder that help can come from the most unexpected quarters. Someone clearly saw potential that others might have overlooked." Each comment was a carefully placed breadcrumb, leading the narrative where I wanted it to go. As I neared our table again, Benjamin intercepted me, pulling me slightly aside, his brow furrowed with what he probably thought was deep concern. "Vic, are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. "You seem intense tonight, more than usual. Is it mother? Did she say something again?" I looked at him, at his handsome, oblivious face. He saw intense. He didn't see the culmination of years of strategic planning. He didn't see the architect of his company's salvation. He just saw his wife, possibly ruffled by his mother, again. "I'm perfectly fine, Benjamin," I said, patting his arm. "Just taking it all in. It's quite an evening after all." "It is, isn't it?" He squeezed my hand, a fleeting moment of connection that felt utterly hollow. "We're going to be okay. Better than okay." He glanced towards the stage. "Looks like Thomas is about to speak." I followed his gaze. Tomas Douglas, the CFO of Spencer Consolidated, was indeed making his way to the podium. His face was pale, his shoulders stooped, as if he carried the weight of the company's near death experience. The room quieted, a hush of anticipation falling over the glittering assembly. This was it, the official announcement, the public acknowledgement of the miracle. Thomas cleared his throat, the sound echoing slightly in the sudden silence. He looked out at the crowd, his expression grave. My heart beat a steady, determined rhythm. The first act of the play was drawing to a close. Thomas gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles white. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice raspy. "As many of you are aware, Spencer Consolidated has faced some significant challenges in recent months. Understatement of the century. Significant challenges didn't even begin to cover the abyss Benjamin had steered them into. It wasn't just market forces, as Edith liked to claim at her bridge club. It was Benjamin, fueled by his mother's relentless pressure to be bigger, grander, more Spencer like than his father. He'd embarked on a reckless expansion, acquiring companies with borrowed money, chasing trends without due diligence, all while Quinn, usually more cautious, had been too distracted by his own legacy projects to properly oversee his son. The debt had piled up a monstrous, suffocating weight. Then came the whispers of ethically dubious deals, shortcuts taken to meet impossible projections, corners cut that were starting to unravel. I'd pieced it together months ago, sifting through casually dropped remarks at family dinners, Benjamin's increasingly late nights, the strained silences between him and his father. I remember one evening about 6 months back. Benjamin had come home smelling of stale coffee and desperation. He'd slumped onto the sofa, tie loosened, face gray. Just a tough quarter, he'd mumbled when I asked what was wrong. Later that night, unable to sleep, I'd gone into his study. His laptop was open. Financial statements, stark and brutal, filled the screen. Red numbers. So many red numbers. And a series of increasingly frantic emails between him and Tomas discussing creative accounting and restructuring options that sounded suspiciously like robbing Peter to pay Paul, with Peter being on the verge of bankruptcy himself. That was the night the vague idea of using GHF's resources had solidified into a concrete plan. My little charity wasn't just about goodwill anymore, it was a financial powerhouse. The sustainable technologies we developed, the hyper efficient solar film, the revolutionary water purification units, weren't just changing lives in developing countries, they were generating licensing fees that dwarfed the Spencer family's old money fortune. We'd become, almost by accident, a titan of green tech, a silent giant in a world obsessed with outdated industries. Malia and I had worked for weeks, meticulously crafting the bailout. It had to be untraceable, anonymous, but also ironclad. We structured it through a series of shell corporations and offshore accounts so complex it would make a seasoned forensic accountant weep. The money was clean, earned through innovation and ethical enterprise, a stark contrast to the increasingly murky waters Spencer Consolidated had been wading in. On the stage, Thomas took a shaky breath. These challenges, they were formidable. There were moments when the future looked uncertain. He paused, and the silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the clink of ice in a distant water glass. Edith sat ramrod straight, her painted smile unwavering, but her fingers were clenched so tightly around her evening bag that her knuckles were white. Benjamin stared at his plate, his jaw working. Quinn looked older than I'd ever seen him, the weight of his family's near ruin etched on his face. However, Tomas continued, a flicker of something like hope entering his voice. At the 11th hour, when all seemed lost, Spencer Consolidated received a lifeline, an act of extraordinary, almost unbelievable generosity. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. People leaned forward in their seats. I am profoundly relieved and deeply humbled to announce tonight, Thomas declared, his voice gaining strength, that Spencer Consolidated has been saved, secured, pulled back from the brink by a staggering anonymous donation that has not only cleared our immediate debts, but has provided us with the capital to rebuild, to restructure, and to move forward on a more stable, sustainable path. A collective gasp, followed by a wave of murmurs, then applause, tentative at first, then swelling into a roar. Edith's smile finally became genuine, a wide, beaming expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She reached over and squeezed Benjamin's arm, her eyes shining. Benjamin looked up, a slow, dazed smile spreading across his face as he met his mother's gaze. Quinn let out a visible breath, his shoulders slumping in relief as he nodded, a grave acknowledgement of their salvation. They were ecstatic, saved by a faceless, nameless angel. I watched them, my expression carefully neutral. The applause washed over me. Tomas was beaming now, too, the stress melting from his face. He raised a hand for quiet. This donor, he said, his voice thick with emotion, wishes to remain anonymous, but their impact will be felt for generations. They have not just saved a company, they have saved a legacy. More applause. Edith was dabbing at her eyes with a lace trimmed handkerchief. Benjamin was shaking hands with the banker, who was now grinning broadly and clapping him on the back. They were celebrating their deliverance, completely oblivious to the identity of their savior, completely oblivious to the fact that the empire Edith so desperately clung to had just been propped up by the soup kitchen she so openly despised. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the cool liquid a balm to my suddenly dry throat. The taste of their oblivion was intoxicating, and the night was far from over. The rest of the dinner service passed in a blur of self congratulation at the Spencer table. Benjamin was animated, expansive, already talking about new ventures and strategic partnerships. Quinn, usually so reserved, actually clinked glasses with him, a rare smile cracking his stern facade. They were the heroes of their own story, the anonymous donor merely a convenient plot device. Edith, however, was in her element. She practically vibrated with triumph, her voice carrying across the nearby tables as she accepted congratulations on Benjamin's brilliant turnaround. She cornered me as the dessert plates were being cleared, her eyes alight with a manic glee. You see, Victoria, dear, she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial hiss, though her smile was wide enough for everyone to see. This is how real empires are managed: decisive, powerful moves, not bake sales and charity auctions for well-meaning causes. She patted my hand again, a gesture that felt more like a brand than a touch. Benjamin has proven himself. He's a true Spencer. He understands what it takes. I offered her my blandest smile. It's certainly a remarkable turn of events, Edith. Remarkable? It's a testament to his fortitude, his vision. She leaned closer. Between you and me, I always knew he had it in him. Sometimes a man just needs the right motivation. Her gaze flickered over me, dismissive, before returning to scan the room, already seeking her next audience. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, were the strings attached to their salvation. The anonymous donation wasn't a blank check. Malia and I had woven in a series of subtle but unbreakable conditions, clauses mandating comprehensive ethical reviews of all Spencer Consolidated's operations, requirements for a shift towards sustainable business practices, a delicious irony given the source of the funds, and most importantly, the establishment of an independent oversight committee to ensure these changes were implemented, a committee to which the Global Harmony Foundation would in due course be recommending a highly qualified consultant, someone like, say, Malia. They were celebrating their freedom, unaware that they'd just willingly walked into a gilded cage built with their own desperation and my money. Benjamin, flushed with success and several glasses of champagne, leaned over and squeezed my shoulder. We should take a real vacation, Vic. After all this, go somewhere extravagant. We deserve it. Perhaps, I said, noncommittal. The idea of spending uninterrupted time with him right now, with this chasm of unspoken truths between us, felt suffocating. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, drawing everyone's attention back to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention once more. It seems our very own matriarch, Mrs. Edith Spencer, would like to say a few words. A polite ripple of applause. Edith preened, rising gracefully from her seat. She smoothed down her already immaculate gown, a queen ascending her throne. She shot me a quick, triumphant glance as if to say, "This is how it's done." As she glided towards the stage, a picture of smug satisfaction, I pushed back my chair. "Excuse me," I murmured to Benjamin. "I just need to check on one of my little projects." He frowned, momentarily distracted from his euphoria. "Now?" Edith's about to speak. "It won't take a moment," I said, my smile enigmatic. I could feel his eyes and Quinn's following me as I walked away from the table, not towards the powder room, but towards the discreet side exit that led to the hotel lobby. My little project was about to get a significant update. The taste of their oblivion was sweet, but the taste of what was coming would be even sweeter. The cool air of the lobby was a welcome relief from the overheated ballroom. I found a quiet alcove, pulled out my phone, and dialed Cade Hart. Cade was an investigative journalist, sharp, discreet, and with a reputation for uncovering truths that powerful people preferred to keep buried. We had a mutually beneficial understanding. "Hart," his voice was clipped, professional. "Cade, it's Victoria," I said, keeping my voice low. Are you watching the Spencer Gala feed? Most major society events like this were live streamed for the less fortunate or the more gossipy. Naturally, he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. Quite the dramatic turnaround for Spencer Consolidated. The anonymous donor angle is gold. Any insights for an old friend? Just a thought, I said casually. The type of donor, it's not your usual corporate raider or vulture fund. This feels different, more principled. Someone with a strong ethical compass, perhaps. Someone the Spencers, in their usual circles, might have completely overlooked. I could almost hear the gears turning in Cade's mind. Overlooked? Or underestimated? He mused. Interesting. You think this donor might have a specific agenda beyond just profit? One might speculate, I said. Perhaps an agenda focused on responsible business, the kind of quiet influence that doesn't seek the spotlight but achieves significant change. Keep an eye on it, the story might get even more interesting. You always did have a knack for understatement, Victoria, Cade said. Consider my interest piqued. Thanks for the perspective. Anytime, Cade? I hung up, a small smile playing on my lips. The seeds were sown. By the time I made my announcement, the narrative would already be subtly shaped. I slipped back into the ballroom just as Edith was winding down her speech, her voice ringing with emotion. And so we raise our glasses to Benjamin, to Spencer Consolidated, and to the bright future that lies ahead, thanks to the incredible, selfless act of a true humanitarian. The applause was thunderous. Benjamin was on his feet, beaming, accepting the adulation. He caught my eye as I returned to the table, his face alight with a euphoric, almost boyish excitement. Vic, you missed it. Mother was brilliant. He pulled me close, his arm around my waist. We're back. Can you believe it? Stronger than ever. We're going to buy that vineyard in Napa I was telling you about. And a new jet. The old one is so dated. I forced a smile. That's wonderful, Benjamin. His ability to immediately pivot to lavish expenditures without a single thought for the source or the strings attached to this windfall was breathtaking in its arrogance. It's amazing, isn't it? He continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil. Help coming from absolutely nowhere, just when we needed it most. It truly is, I agreed, my voice carefully neutral. I turned to Mrs. Albright, who was seated nearby. It just goes to show, doesn't it? Help can come from where you least expect it. Sometimes the quietest people have the biggest impact. Mrs. Albright nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, a very profound observation, Victoria. The memory surfaced then, unbidden but sharp. About a year ago, when the financial storm clouds were gathering but before the full hurricane hit, Benjamin had approached me. It was late, he was stressed, and for a moment the carefully constructed wall between his world and my hobby had cracked. Vic, he'd said, running a hand through his hair, those charitable contacts of yours, the foundation people, do they do they ever deal with, discreet lenders? We have a temporary cash flow issue. Nothing serious, just need to bridge a gap. I remembered the flicker of hope in his eyes, quickly masked by his usual bravado. He hadn't known the scale of GHHF, of course. He still thought of it as bake sales and grant applications. He was asking if my little charity knew any loan sharks, essentially. I'd feigned ignorance, a polite helplessness. Oh, Benjamin, I don't think so. We mostly deal with philanthropic grants, donations, nothing like what you're describing. Part of it was to gauge his desperation, to see how deep the rot truly went. Part of it was because my own, much larger plan was already beginning to form, and his desperate, small scale plea would have only complicated things. He'd waved a dismissive hand. Right, of course, stupid idea. Don't worry about it. And he'd never mentioned it again. His current absolute lack of suspicion, his utter failure to connect any dots, was therefore even more galling. He hadn't even considered me, or GHF, as a possibility. I was just his wife, the one with the nice hobby. Edith, having concluded her triumphant speech, was now making her way back to the table, basking in the glow of applause and admiring glances. As she sat, she leaned towards Quinn and said, her voice carrying clearly in a momentary lull, we believe we know who our Savior might be, or at least their noble spirit, and we intend to thank them personally very, very soon. Just then, the MC stepped back to the podium, a wide smile on his face. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mrs. Spencer, and now we have one final and truly extraordinary announcement to make. It seems the whispers have been true. We believe a representative of the anonymous donor is, in fact, with us here tonight and has graciously agreed to say a few words. A hush, so profound it felt like the air itself had been sucked from the room, fell over the gala. Every fork was stilled, every whispered conversation died. All eyes, hundreds of them, fixed on the MC, who seemed to visibly swell with the importance of his announcement. Edith, who had just been beaming, froze mid smile, her head cocked. Benjamin looked around, a flicker of confusion, then dawning excitement in his eyes. Quinn leaned forward, his expression unreadable. They were all anticipating the unveiling of some benevolent billionaire, some titan of industry who had, for reasons of their own, decided to play fairy godmother. The MC paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, his voice resonating with theatricality. It is my distinct honor to introduce the driving force behind the extraordinary donation that has secured the future of Spencer Consolidated, the founder, the visionary, the heart of the Global Harmony Foundation, Ms. Victoria Spencer. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing, just a stunned, absolute silence. Then a collective intake of breath, a ripple of disbelief that spread through the room like a shockwave. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of its legs on the polished floor sounded deafening in the sudden quiet. All eyes, and I mean all eyes, swiveled towards me. Edith's face was a study in rapid, horrifying transformation. The triumphant glow vanished, replaced by a slack jawed bewilderment, then a dawning, sickening comprehension. Her perfectly coiffed head swiveled towards me, her eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Benjamin looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face drained of all color, his eyes locked on mine, wide with an expression of utter, uncomprehending shock. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, or worse, a version of his wife he never knew existed. Quinn simply stared, his stoic mask finally cracking, revealing a raw, stunned disbelief. I rose, smoothed down my dress, a simple, elegant sheath, deliberately understated, and began to walk towards the stage. Each step felt measured, powerful. The polite applause that had started, hesitant and confused, faltered and died as the reality of the MC's announcement began to sink in. The room was a sea of gaping mouths and wide eyes. Jordan Whitney looked like she was about to spontaneously combust from sheer, unadulterated gossip overload. I reached the podium. The MC, looking slightly dazed himself, stepped aside. I adjusted the microphone, my hand steady. I looked out at the room, at the stunned faces, and then my gaze settled on the Spencer family table, on Edith, her face now a mask of apoplectic fury, on Benjamin, who looked like he was about to be physically ill. Good evening, I began, my voice calm, clear, and amplified by the microphone it carried to every corner of the vast ballroom. Yes, it's true. The Global Harmony Foundation is the anonymous donor that has provided the necessary capital for Spencer Consolidated. A fresh wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. For years, I continued, my voice even, many of you, particularly my extended family, have known GHF as a little charity, a hobby, and it did start small, driven by a desire to make a tangible difference in the world. I paused, letting that sink in. What you may not know is that GHF also became an incubator for innovation. We developed and globally licensed a portfolio of highly profitable, patented green technologies. These technologies have not only funded our extensive philanthropic work worldwide, but have also made the Global Harmony Foundation a significant financial entity in its own right, a very significant one. I turned my gaze directly to Edith. Her face was mottled with rage and disbelief. You once told me, Edith, I said, my voice still calm but with an edge of steel, that your son needed a partner who builds empires, not soup kitchens. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. Well, Edith, it seems my soup kitchen just saved yours. Perhaps empires built on ethical foundations, on innovation and genuine global contribution, are ultimately more resilient than those built merely on legacy and acquisition. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and suddenly frail. Then I turned to my husband. Benjamin was pale, his eyes still wide with shock, a dawning horror creeping into his expression. And to my husband, Benjamin. I said, my voice softening almost imperceptibly, but still carrying the weight of years of unspoken resentment. You championed silence when your family belittled my work. You asked me to be patient, to understand. Value, Benjamin, can be built in many ways. It can be loud and ostentatious, or it can be quiet, diligent, and impactful. It's time you recognize them all. The room was in an absolute uproar. Shock, dawning, comprehension, the frantic buzz of whispered conversations. Camera flashes, which had been sporadic, now erupted in a frenzy. Reporters, no doubt alerted by Cade, were already pushing forward. I raised a hand, and slowly the noise subsided a little. The Global Harmony Foundation, I concluded, my voice firm and unwavering, looks forward to a collaborative future with Spencer Consolidated, a future guided by new ethical guidelines and a commitment to sustainable practices, which we will, of course, discuss in detail. Thank you. I stepped down from the podium, leaving behind a scene of utter pandemonium. The Spencers, Edith, Benjamin, Quinn were frozen, trapped at their table amidst a maelstrom of questions, flashing cameras, and the stunned, staring eyes of their entire social circle. My empire had just declared war, and I had won the first decisive battle. The ballroom erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore, it was a cacophony of voices, exclamations, and the relentless click shutter whir of cameras. Reporters, smelling blood and a sensational story, swarmed towards the Spencer table, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Edith looked like she was having a stroke. Her face, moments before alight with triumph, was now a ghastly shade of pale, her mouth opening and closing silently as if she'd forgotten how to speak. Quinn, ever the stoic, simply stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Benjamin? Benjamin looked utterly broken. He tried to stand, to push through the throng towards me, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of desperation and confusion. Victoria! Vic! Wait! But Malia was suddenly by my side, a small, formidable phalanx of GHF's senior team, materializing as if from nowhere, a contingency I'd, of course, planned. This way, Victoria, Malia said, her voice calm and authoritative, gently guiding me towards the same side exit I'd used earlier. We moved through the chaos, a small island of composure in a sea of shocked faces and frantic energy. I didn't look back. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Cade's initial tip off, combined with the on the ground reports from the gala, exploded into a media frenzy. The Anonymous Empire, one headline screamed. Soup Kitchen Savior bails out corporate giant, read another slightly more gleeful one. The Spencer name, once a bastion of old money prestige, was now synonymous with a rather embarrassing public takedown. There was gossip, naturally, endless speculation about the state of my marriage, about Edith's spectacular fall from social grace. But beneath it, there was also a grudging, almost astonished respect for what GHF, what I had built. Spencer Consolidated had no choice but to accept GHF's terms. The collaboration was swift and decisive. Malia was appointed to a newly formed advisory board tasked with overseeing the ethical reforms and the shift towards sustainable practices we'd mandated. The old guard at the company grumbled, but the sheer financial leverage GHF now held was undeniable. They either played by our rules or they faced a very public, very messy unwinding of the bailout. Edith became a social pariah almost overnight. Her pronouncements on empire building were now the stuff of snickering memes. Invitations dried up. Her power, built on a foundation of arrogance and inherited status, crumbled like dry leaves. I heard through the grapevine she'd taken to her bed, indisposed. Benjamin was a wreck. He called. He texted. He showed up at the small, discreet apartment I'd leased weeks before the gala, a place he never knew existed. His apologies were clumsy, desperate, laced with a bewilderment that told me he still didn't fully grasp how we'd arrived here. I I had no idea, Vic, he stammered one evening, standing awkwardly in my new living room, a space uncluttered by Spencer history. What you were doing, what they were saying. I should have. I just didn't see. No, Benjamin, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You didn't want to see. There's a difference. I didn't slam the door in his face, metaphorically or literally. I listened, but I made no promises. The power dynamic between us had shifted irrevocably. It was mine now, and I wasn't about to relinquish it for the sake of a comfortable, familiar lie. Our marriage, if it was to survive, would have to be rebuilt from the ground up on entirely new terms. His terms. Life settled into a new rhythm. I was busier than ever, GHF now firmly in the global spotlight, not just as a philanthropic force, but as a model for ethical enterprise. The satisfaction was deep, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my days. My revenge had been complete, meticulously planned, and flawlessly executed. It wasn't just about punishing the Spencers, it was about claiming my own power, my own narrative. A few weeks after the gala, I was in the GHF boardroom, a sleek, modern space filled with natural light, a world away from the stuffy opulence of the Spencer homes. We were strategizing a new initiative, a global literacy program leveraging our solar technology to power remote learning centers. My team was energized, brilliant, focused. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the caller ID Benjamin. I let it ring for a moment, then excused myself from the meeting, stepping out onto the small balcony overlooking the city. Hello, Benjamin, I answered. His voice was hesitant, stripped of its old entitlement. Victoria, hi. I was just calling. I saw the news about the literacy initiative. It sounds incredible. A pause. I was wondering, is there anything at all I can do to help with your work? I looked out at the sprawling city, at the endless possibilities. A small, thoughtful smile touched my lips. He was trying. It was a start, a very small, very tentative start. I'll let you know, Benjamin, I said, my voice neutral, giving nothing away. I'll let you know. I ended the call and turned back to the boardroom, back to my team, back to the empire I had built. It was thriving on my terms. And for the first time in a very long time, so was I.